Welcome to the next edition of the In Abooters, a podcast designed to find out more about people who were born and bred, live, sweat, breathe and eat here in the northeast of Scotland, or have travelled further afield after they've done that, or come to this part to find out more about the northeast of Scotland and live here. It's a podcast brought to you by ifb.net, and I'm your host, Graham Gordon, for today. And I'm delighted to welcome along Duncan Logan. Duncan, how are you?
Hi, great to see you. I'm well.
Good. So we always ask our guests, tell us who you are, what you do, and who you do it for.
Great. So, as you said, I'm Duncan Logan, born and bred in Scotland. I now live in San Francisco. I started my career in farming. I studied agriculture at Aberdeen University. My parents are farmers in Fife. I thought that was the path I was going to go. But while I was at university, my parents ended up selling most of their farming interests. And so I was free to go chase whatever I wanted to chase. And I went straight down to London, got a job at Swiss Bank trading derivatives, which I thought would be an interesting difference. Did their graduate program, but after a couple of years of that, decided to move into tech. And I have been in tech all my life, now living in California, working in Silicon Valley, building tech companies.
And that affinity that we've met a couple of times online, but in person a couple of times, you still have that affinity for the region. Is that something, and I didn't realize it was a farming background, is that something that was bred into you, you think, that there's a homeliness about this area for you?
There is. I think there's something which is very much so in my DNA of the harshness of, once you get up into the northeast, it's a harsh climate. I have fond but terrible memories of training for rugby out at Balgownie, in the driving snow, wearing 4 rugby shirts and 2 pairs of socks and stuff. And it builds this grit into you that at first you're like, oh my God, I don't want to go out in this. And then you're like, no, this is me. This is all about me. And I have, I think I've just carried that with me from the Northeast. There's a harshness about living in a cold, wet, often climate. And you can either embrace that and make that part of your character, or you can steer away from it. But people who've never had it, I think lack something in that. So I love the fact that I spent a couple of years up at university there, and it was, my memory of it was dark and cold and wet, and it's just harsh. But I kind of love that about it, and I think it's definitely formed part of my character ever since.
And you mentioned that word character and DNA. Is that a gritty determination to go and try something, go somewhere new, experiment, fail fast, win quick, all those sort of things, or win slow sometimes? You think that's a trait that you've carried with you all the way through to what you're doing now?
I do. I think there's 2 things which have kind of defined my life. One is curiosity, and I'm just the internet's been this kind of dangerous place for me because you can really find anything on the internet, and I've always lived in the kind of what's next. So there's the what's now, the what's coming next, and then what's coming. What won't society really get into? At the moment it's crypto and AI and stuff like this, but what's going to be mainstream in probably a decade's time or something like that. So I always live in that kind of out there piece. So the curiosity has taken me all around the world, into China, into numerous countries around the world doing business, and the second piece of that is the grit. It is that Scottish, as some friends would call me, I'm a cockroach of just surviving, and no matter, I've been in so many situations where people will come in and say, oh my God, we're screwed. This is, and I'm like, now it's getting interesting. This is where we roll up our sleeves and get going. And, having a sense of calm when, I think there's very few things are fatal. And most things turn out better than you'd expect. So yeah, I think between grit, curiosity, and positivity,
Yeah.
I think it's three things that I've really hung on to.
I mean, that's great to hear. But do you feel you've sometimes sought out that challenging environment? You know, sometimes things happen and they fail, but have you challenged yourself and others by part of doing that?
I I think it is sort of infectious. I read
Mm,
the phenomenal book on Elon Musk, and he really is an incredible entrepreneur. But you see it in the book that every time things start getting calm
mm,
and stable, he triggers something that just puts his life back into this uncontrollable whirlwind, and
mm,
he just moves from whether that was buying Twitter or but just when you think he
mm,
must have running SpaceX and
mm,
the Boring Company and Tesla. He must have so much on his plate. But whenever he gets a quiet couple of weeks, he triggers something else. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs have that kind of
mm,
failure, that fault that
mm.
it's a hectic life that you get trapped into, but you're kind of addicted to it.
And that, so you've brought up on a farm. That wasn't going to happen. Freed up, moved to London, worked for the corporate, and then comfortable, I would imagine, working for that corporate. But then, in what sought out something more challenging in America, did America naturally draw you in that direction?
It it did, um, and in some regards, I'm glad I did. I did 20 years in London. I built a company, sold that, and then I
Mm,
joined. I built a software company just reselling. We would install CDs, customize the software, train the users, and that was the business. And I built that business and sold it, and that was a great experience. And then I sort of met with a friend who had this idea, which was really SaaS. There was no software; it was all software as a service, and it was one of the first software as a service companies ever built in the UK, called Message Labs, an email
mhm,
security firm.
mhm,
And I joined Ben when it was just a 10-person company, and we built that to a 700-person company and sold it for 700 million to Symantec in the US. And by that point, that was a phenomenal experience of 8 years of, building a team, traveling around the world, and seeing this whole new market of software as a service get going. But it also gave me an exposure to America. And
mhm,
America is staggering. There's a huge number of things horrible and wrong about America. Don't get me wrong.
yeah.
But as an economy and a business environment, there's three companies within 100 miles of me here that have, between them, have a greater GDP than the whole of the UK. That's the sort
Mhm,
of scale of America,
mhm,
which is quite staggering.
mhm. I mean, you mentioned Message Labs. You know, for a geek like me, that's
Mm.
internet history. You know, that's ingrained in internet history. And do you find a satisfaction in being involved in those sort of place markers as you've gone along? The success, is that part of the success and drive? Has it been cathartic?
I've never thought of it like that, but you're in a funny sort of way. When we sold, or it was Ben's company, when Ben sold Message Labs, it was a $700 million exit, which in today's terms would
Mm,
feel like quite a modest. It's not a unicorn, it's not a billion-dollar
mhm,
exit. Um, but at the time in 2008, I think it was the second largest technology
mhm,
sale ever out of the UK. And, it was a UK company. We sold to Symantec, this US security company. And it was really interesting. And when I moved to San Francisco, I set up a company called RocketSpace, where we were a hub for all these different companies. And what was fascinating about that was when you look at the companies that were in there, Uber, which is now
mhm,
pretty well known. It was Uber Cab when they were in Rocket Space, but there were just 7 people working on this idea that because we now had GPS on our phones, we could move from this kind of line of sight hailing a taxi to digital hailing a taxi, and there's just numerous benefits of that. Spotify, they had their first person in America where this idea of you don't go and put music on, music just plays itself. It uses an
Mm-hmm.
algorithm to just work out, these are really
Mm-hmm.
pioneering. They feel totally normal now that you just switch on Spotify and it just plays music you like. But up until that point, you'd play records or tapes or CDs, and you'd have to, turn it over or
Mm-hmm.
and so this layback version of music, and things like Waze, for traffic management, this idea
Yeah.
of give, get, you give a little bit of data, but you get an enormous amount of data back. All of these systems were built, and then gaming was huge as well in RocketSpace. So I've always been fascinated by the science of every business and
Mm-hmm.
why has it exploded? Why did Facebook come along and just explode on a dimension that's hard for people to get, and is still growing. It's got
Mm-hmm.
billions of people. More people are on Facebook every day than in the Catholic Church. It's
Yeah.
just on
Yeah.
a different sort of scale. And then understanding that if you're getting a service for free, um, you are the product. You're not the customer, and these sort of things, which there's a science to every business, and I'm always curious to kind of try and work it out.
And that formation of Rocket Space, to me as an outsider looking in on it, was you taking your skills, your experience, and your knowledge and your resources, and trying to nurture and develop others in that space. It was a business, let's face it, it was a business, but you
Yep.
were creating, ecosystem, community, whatever you want to call it. That must have been quite an adventure for you and the team as you were doing that. Um,
It Yeah, we started as just this very simple idea that birds of a feather flock together, and if we could
mhm,
bring together really ambitious entrepreneurs into one physical building in San Francisco, then something great would happen out of that. And it
mm,
took off like a rocket. It really did. We raised 350 million into that business. We expanded across China, opened up offices there. We did a great partnership with the Royal Bank of Scotland with Ross
mhm,
McEwen at the time, and opened a big office in London. Um, and it was a fascinating ride in building that business, but it was also fascinating being so close to all these enormous multi-billion-dollar companies when they were just, one person. Flexport, which is now a
mhm,
huge logistics company, it was just Ryan. It was one person when he was in RocketSpace. So I say Uber was 7 people, Spotify was one, Supercell gaming company was 15, 20 people. So seeing these companies and the chaos that they go through just trying to keep up with demand is just staggering. They look like a swan on top of the water, but below the water it is just all out chaos.
and that infectiousness that came from that chaos, you were part of that and you were seeing that. That must have kept you fresh as well. I mean, you were in that environment. It must have rejuvenated you because let's face it, as a founder, owner, CEO, we peak and trough. We do go
Yeah,
through those peaks and troughs.
it's entrepreneurship is brutal. It
Mm,
is. I really often I kind of look at myself and go, why would we do this? It is non-stop worry, non-stop raising capital, non-stop selling, non-stop dealing with people, non-stop dealing with competition and threats and legal and
mhm,
all of this. It is, it's not for the faint-hearted, but I think it's like the runner's high
mm,
of being a marathon runner or something.
mm.
Running a marathon is a hell of a thing, but you get that high and that sense of achievement, and I think that's what kind of keeps drawing me back to you know the entrepreneurial component. And it's funny because I'm back building a new company, this company
Mhm,
90 in the climate space at the moment, and I so love the kind of first couple of years, the 0 to 1 phase, getting those first customers, those first invoices, that first revenue going. Once the company gets bigger and you're trying to hit, can we do 1 million a month or 2 million a month or whatever, it's kind of less interesting to me. That first, I've got an idea and people are paying because they see the value in that idea. That's the piece I love. Yeah.
I
Oh,
think I've back. Oh, we're
yeah,
back in the
we're
room.
back.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, back in the room. Um, so maybe just resetting that one. So that. So the mechanic that you bring to the business. So once a business is running, it tends to just run. You know, I'm a great believer
Well,
that
you'd
most
hope so.
businesses just, well, yeah, well, yes, unless they run out of air or fuel or customers. But you mentioned getting that first order. I think a lot of business entrepreneurs forget that sales is absolutely critical because it means you've got a customer willing to pay you for your, Facebook for dogs. If somebody's going to pay you for
Yeah.
that, I think a lot. Do you see that a lot in startups? Is that an overall thing that in terms of I don't know how to get my first customer, but why is nobody buying from me? That sales being
Yeah.
important.
So I think there's a science to, I think starting a startup is insanely hard
Mm,
unless you kind of understand what a startup is about. And there's an organization that I would strongly recommend every entrepreneur to go and spend a month just reading all their material. It's called Y Combinator, and they've put out a huge amount of material because the the crux of any company is produce a product or service that people want. And that
mm,
sounds very basic, but
mm,
that is the crux of the business. Now, identifying what people want is
mm,
really important. And so often, people go away and say, "Oh, I think this would be a great idea. I'm going to build this company," and they build it all, and they go, "Da-da," and nobody cares. Nobody wants
mm,
it. Nobody's willing to pay for it, or whatever. But the starting point for me is before you want to make very sure your company is going to be successful before you even commit to it. And so
mm,
I always start with producing sort of white papers of what I'm thinking of producing. And even at RocketSpace, I created this fake company called 3PM. It stood for per person per month. And I said, thinking about opening a space in downtown San Francisco purely for tech entrepreneurs trying to build startups, who's interested? And
mm,
I waited for this, and I put it on a thing called Craigslist here,
mhm,
and it started getting people started applying and saying, "Hey, I'm interested. I got a company of 3 people. I'm interested." And then that wasn't enough, so we changed it and said, okay, it's only for tech companies, and you have to have raised one round of funding to get it. And that's when it really started taking off, and people started saying, "Hey, I got an email from my buddy. He told me about what you're doing. Can I put my name down?" And so before we even opened the doors at RocketSpace, we had 35, 40 companies waiting to come in. And the same
mm,
with 90. um, I said, "I've got this idea. I'm thinking about doing this. Who's interested?" And we officially launch next month in April, and we've
mm.
already got 1,300 and something companies signed up. So we've already had a huge, there's idea market fit, which you have to kind of find before product market fit. But I
Yeah.
think it helps that you're going to be successful when you finally launch, which is there's so many companies launch and just never find that product market fit that I think is a tough way to go about it.
Do you think? I mean, we'll speak about 90 in a second if we may, if that's okay with
Mhm.
you.
Sure.
But do you think just listening to what you're saying there, posting something on a notice board on Craigslist to see if MD will come and look at it to see if they're interested in my idea? So take that moment in time and fast forward to now. How much has technology enabled a startup or you to spin an idea up? The idea is still going to be
Uh,
valuable. It's going to have depth. How's that been impactful, do you think?
I it is it's good and bad because it's super easy to do now. I mean,
Mm.
I don't put it on Craigslist now. I just put it out on LinkedIn or Facebook or
Yeah.
out to any of these
Yeah.
on my Twitter or whatever. Any of these, I should say X, any of these social networks. So it's easy to do that. But the downside is it's easy for everyone to do that. And
Yeah.
if you've
Yeah.
got an idea, there's this kind of thesis in Silicon Valley. If you've got an idea, you've got to understand that there's probably 4 or 5 people have exactly the same idea at the same time, because your idea has been triggered by something, and that something's probably triggered their idea at the same time. And you see that with, we got these phones with GPSs, and Uber had the idea, and at the same time there was Sidecar and another company called Lyft, and in China there
Mm.
was Didi Chongqing. and there's all these people that, was it coincidence that, 5 ride hailing apps arrived in the same, space of the same 14 months? No, there was a triggering moment. And so I think it's easier to find out if your idea resonates, but I think the competition to get that idea to market is much harder now. And we see this with AI. I must get a dozen new ideas for AI being thrust in front of me, saying, "Would you buy this? Would you buy this? Would you invest in this?" And it's so much faster than anything in the past.
Yeah, it's back to, it's still the business basic. Have you got a customer? Are you solving a problem, and are they willing to pay for it? And if you've got
Yeah,
a room full of people who are part of your echo chamber, like your mum and dad and your aunts and
yeah,
uncles, they're gonna love you. They're gonna absolutely
yeah,
love you. But I think sometimes Scotland suffers from that small community that people are comfortable in, and what you've done is gone and made yourself successfully uncomfortable, for want of a better expression, in terms of where you're doing. Tell us a little bit about 9-0. So you're talking about beyond the horizon. You like seeing what's coming in 5 and 10 years down the line, and 9-0 must fit into that. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it. Give us a little bit of flavour on what 9-0 is doing, please.
So 9-0 is purely focused on there's two triggers that got me into the climate space, and I'm unashamed of both of them. So one is having kids and looking at the world they're gonna adopt and come into it for sure. And the second one is not so typical, but it's really looking at just the size of the opportunity of climate. And and I have no doubt the human race will solve the climate change problem. We will be forced to solve the climate change problem. But what I think most people don't understand is the size and scale of what the climate revolution needs to look like. And we're being forced into it now, and we start to see, the US sign the IRA Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really a climate bill, which is about $3 trillion all in towards climate. You see the adoption in India and China and how everyone's getting into this market. But the climate opportunity is vast. To bring this into context, the climate revolution will dwarf the digital revolution that you and I have lived through. The digital revolution produced 4 mega companies, Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. For climate to get anywhere near to solve the problem we're facing, we need somewhere between 80 and 100 companies. We're talking about spending 150 trillion over and above our global GDP over the next 30 years. Well, to bring that into context, the only project anywhere near that sort of scale would have been China over the previous 30 years, moving from a third world country to where it is today, which has been this staggering development. That was about $17 trillion. So the climate, it's absolutely true. The first trillionaire in the world will be a climate solution. Somebody building a climate company. So the starting point for me is understanding the data that this is an enormous opportunity. It's rebuilding the entire world global economy, from power and energy to mobility to food to everything has to be rebuilt in some more climate friendly way. And I'm not an activist saying we've got to stop flying, stop driving cars, stop drilling oil. We need all those things. And the oil industry, Aberdeen obviously has a huge connection to this. The oil industry has propelled society forward. The biggest industry before the oil industry came along was whaling. So thank God that went away. And we've all benefited from it. And it's unreasonable to say these companies have to stop drilling for oil tomorrow, because if they did that, the world would fall apart. So we have to have this transition, and what we're doing at 9-0 is sort of building the two things that I think need to happen. Is we need to connect the climate community together. So we're building a digital app for that, and actually we're doing both digital and physical. So we're rolling out climate hubs across the US, and then people can connect through those, either physically at those climate hubs or digitally on a not a social network, but a business network, purely for entrepreneurs and capital and funders and scientists, because climate involves a ton of science, so that we can help get those solutions to market quicker.
And that is quite a different way of looking at it. In terms of it being in pockets, what you're building is a much, it's a big problem, so it's going to need a lot of people to solve it, and for a long, persistent period of time.
Yeah.
And so that's you looking beyond that horizon again, I take it. And that must be quite satisfying, because you'll be getting buy-in support to that.
It's the buy-in, it's incredible, because there's so many people, especially in California. I mean, California's economy is just booming. And I know the UK is, we've got our political troubles here in America, and I know the UK's got political uncertainty, and Brexit's been a nightmare, and the economy's strong. But California, California just as part of America, California is its own economy, and it's just booming. And there are so many people who have made so much money in California at Apple or Google or Amazon or whatever. And what are they all coming out and getting into? They're all coming out and investing in climate solutions, because they're all reaching that point of, it doesn't matter how much money I have if we don't have a climate, if we don't have a world to live on. So I think the transition to all the people who've been working on climate for the last 20 or 30 years, I kind of feel for them, because we've really made very little progress. We're at COP 29 now, and you just think it's always kick the can down the road. But what we're trying to do is show climate not as something we need to prevent, but as a money making opportunity. And I think that's when America will jump in with both feet and say, hey, if this is if solving the climate is a money making opportunity, we want to own it, and we'll be all over it. And that's what we need to encourage, in order to remove CO2 from there and get the world back up more on a stable footing.
It's business, and I think sometimes you'll get people saying you're making money out, or you're profiteering, but that's what business does. And also, we're solving a problem that everybody, for the first time globally, everybody's in the same bucket. So we've all got
and
the
it's
same
the only
problem.
way. Profiteering from climate, I think, is an interesting comment. But I'm just focused on the solution, and the only way in the modern world that I know how to activate people, activate thousands, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, is if they can make money doing it, because that's a society we've built. And whether it's people in India or people in Bangladesh or people in Africa, or how do we, all of these people have one thing in common: they all want to improve their lives. And if we can enable them to do that by solving climate change, to me that's a win-win.
So normally at this point, I'd ask people, or I guess, if somebody was thinking about moving to the northeast of Scotland, what would you say? And you've sold it on the weather. Thanks very much. My wife and I spent 2 weeks top to bottom in California last year, and we've been before, but we just appreciating the scale of the state, and driving through parts of it we've never been before was just fantastic. We really enjoyed it. Yeah. But what I will ask you then is, if somebody is an entrepreneur, somebody wants to start a company just now, somebody they don't have an idea, but they have an itch to go and start something. Is it climate? Do you think climate is the thing that people can get into? What advice would you give somebody with that itch they need to scratch?
I think it's a very dangerous proposition to be an entrepreneur looking for a problem to solve. Without a doubt, the best problem you can solve is something that you have a unique insight to that nobody else does. And that may be because you're just curious, and you just spend, if you spend 3 weeks researching one thing on the internet, you're in a very small community that have bothered to do that. So, you can go find that, but I think you have to have something. It's such a hard job to take on, such a hard career. You've got to have something that you're passionate about, and something which, I have a friend in Scotland who is a mad keen golfer, and he started a business taking Americans to far out golf courses on the islands up the west coast of Scotland. And I'm like, that is a perfect business for that guy because he loves golf. He's very hospitable and he's built a business around it. And, you know, so I think find something think about what you're passionate about and where you maybe have some unique insight. And this is why people coming out of corporations, they can see a problem that their corporate has. And then, you know, they have a unique insight on that problem. And then they could go build a business around it. But yeah, I think you have to have some sort of unique insight, and then think about, you know, don't rush to start the business. You'll never get the time again to kind of sit and meet with people and bounce ideas about the business off people. And you know, most of these meetings you only get one little nugget of idea, but it's what move. You know, it's 100 nuggets that move an idea forward in a more successful path. And yeah, I would love every entrepreneur take a look at climate. There's a million opportunities.
I'll take that away and feed it back into the appropriate authorities that we have here. Duncan, it's been fabulous listening to you as and talking with you. As always, we ask our guests 4 random questions at the end of so you're at a slight disadvantage because you've been out of the way for a while. So I'm going to adopt one of them. So D-side or C-side?
Ooh, I'll go D-side. And I will say some of the most gorgeous days of my life have been up in the Highlands of Scotland. You know, when it is nice, you know, hiking over those, it is God's country. So I will come back and defend my Scottish roots, that I've not gone all California on us.
We will entertain you gladly.
The best days in Scotland are the best days in the world for sure. But yeah, I'll go D-side rather than C-side. Not a big C-side person. So
maybe a little bit of a loaded question: the Valley or the Glens?
Well, I'll go the Glens. Yeah, just as I say, one of the beautiful things about doing agriculture in Aberdeen is you go off and visit all sorts of farms, you know, across Aberdeenshire and stuff, and some of them, you know, just stunning, absolutely stunning. So yeah, I'll go up there.
Startup or scale up?
I'm a startup guy for sure. The 0 to 1 phase, not the 1 to many. You know, I think there are some people who can do both, but I think my skill set is in getting an idea to, you know, 20 million, 30 million in revenue, and then probably hand it off to someone else, let them take it the rest of the way.
But that goes back to your deep domain expertise in that space. You know, you've become passionate about that space, and why would you step outside it if it works?
I think it's a certain person, certain sort of lack of brains that you need to keep going back into that space. But it's just what I like. Once teams get, you know, too big, once you've got over 100 people or a couple hundred people, it becomes a different sort of business to manage. So I kind of like it in the 0 to 100 space.
Got you. And I've adapted the last one because we chatted earlier. Tatty scone or donut?
Yeah. Tatty's gone forever. You just can't get them over here. Plenty of donuts.
There's a reason why. There's a reason why they don't travel well.
Yeah. It's I don't think I could ever persuade a Californian that this is such a hot topic in Aberdeen. But yeah, I used to love tatty scone. Yeah.
Fantastic. Duncan, it's been a pleasure joining you to the In Abooters Club. Thank you very much for your time today.
Well, my pleasure. It's been great to catch up. What a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.